Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be reviewing Steve Carell's new Netflix comedy Space Force, and then Jeff Lemire's and Phil Hester's new comic Family Tree. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, I've been continuing to work my way through the first two seasons of Dark in advance of our upcoming Dark episode, which, if the third series is as good as the first two, should be pretty exciting, but we'll definitely be talking about that at some length in the near future, so I'll spare you the extensive Dark discussion, except to say that it is very good, and if you want to try and cram the first two seasons in before the third one drops on the 27th of June, I can fully recommend it. But yeah, aside from Dark, I've been reading the opening run of The Authority, a comic from the very late 90s, early 2000s, so in short, very much my comic book coming of age sweet spot era, by Warren Ellis, yes, him again, and Brian Hitch. This was a superhero comic released by Wildstorm, which is a company that used to be part of Image and had just been bought by DC at the time, trivia fans. It's a book credited with starting a sort of a general movement in what was described as, I guess, widescreen or upscale superheroes. Like superheroes where it wasn't just about fighting a single supervillain, but genuinely about, smashing entire islands, or armies demolishing whole cities, or throwing dimensions into other dimensions. This general sense of huge, enormous panels showing massive action scenes happening in slow motion as entire countries get blown up or something. It was a very big trend in the 2000s, and The Authority is kind of credited with inspiring a lot of it, I think. Yeah, a lot of people talk about Warren Ellis being a very influential creator, and one of the main things they mean by that, I think, is this sense that he did The Authority and then a lot of people copied The Authority. There was a lot of attempts to do like the Marvel version of The Authority, which was, I think, The Ultimates, which was a version of The Avengers by Mark Miller and, again, Brian Hitch. And there was quite a few stories about DC characters reacting to characters who resembled The Authority. It's weird reading The Authority, because when you read it when you're a teenager, you mostly just think it's cool. Like, holy shit, that dude just maimed 17 people in 4 seconds, and then the other one's just blown up a country. There's a witty quip, because, again, it's a Warren Ellis comic, so the witty quips are always there. You read it again as an adult, and the witty quips are still funny, but occasionally some of what they do is quite disturbing. Their attitude to their widescreen destruction is very much a bit authoritarian. They'll blow up a huge chunk of your country, and then their leader will go on the TV and say, okay, we hope you got that message, behave. I think Warren Ellis clearly had some idea that The Authority should be both cool and slightly scary. Again, it's one of these things where the original writer may have intended it that way, but then they got taken over by some later writers who perhaps didn't fully care that much about the moral ambiguity of it and were just interested in blowing the most shit up possible. Later runs of The Authority are at times a bit hit and miss, but the original Warren Ellis one is still interesting.
Sounds good. So this was a trendsetter, a trend that continued for a long time, or to this day, or?
The trend of widescreen superheroes, big panels, who can blow up the biggest thing, will continue for a few years. The trend of what I think is mostly called decompressed storytelling, which was happening elsewhere anyway, but this was one of a few things that really tipped it. This concept of writing comics a lot more for the 4 to 6 issue arc than for the individual 1 or 2 issue story is something that has very much carried on from The Authority. I think Ultimate Spider-Man was another big trendsetter in that regard. That was already kind of happening in comics like Preacher and Sandman, but yeah, The Authority and Ultimate Spider-Man were kind of what pushed it into mainstream superhero comics and made it so, rather than just sort of adult-orientated sci-fi fantasy comics were like that, basically every comic was like that. If anything, it was extremely like that for about 10 years, and then since then it's walked back a tiny bit.
Yeah, that sounds similar to, I guess, also in possibly the late 90s, early 2000s, when obviously TV, especially TV dramas, transitioned from the, adventure of the week to the more arc plot oriented episodes. So, I mean, if you look at the difference between, say, The X-Files and like 24, when it kind of shows, the change. The X-Files is very much there's a mystery each week. 24 it's just one story that runs throughout the entire series.
Yeah, I think in both cases, I think a lot of it is to do with the rise of what I guess we now call binge viewing or bulk consuming.
Yeah.
The backlist would be readily available, and you could actually assume people could access the whole thing. Like, through a lot of the 90s and earlier, comics would often just fucking vanish a few months after they'd gone on sale. Like, you could go and find them. You would have to be a sort of a hardcore back issue box hunting collector. It was not a good idea to assume that a huge percentage of your readers had read every previous issue in order. Whereas, obviously, yeah, late 90s, early 2000s, we got the rise of, in comics, the rise of the collected edition paperback, and in TV and stuff, you got the rise of the DVD box set. And in both cases, yeah, it means you can sort of go for these longer arcs and make these assumptions.
And the other thing also is the rise of Amazon, which meant you could just go online and buy the back catalogue or, you know, previous series or something if you wanted to watch your way through it. So obviously with TV shows or with comics, I guess you'd have to before that you'd have to go to like a shop and hope that they had it in stock or could order it in for you, which wasn't always the case. Whereas with Amazon, they had everything just there, so you could like just buy up a back catalogue and catch up with it. And now you get to the point like Netflix, you don't even have to spend money. You paid your subscription and the entire back catalogue is just there for you.
It's one of these things which was like mind-blowing at the time, and then a few years later have been overdone to the point of self-parody. Like, you read The Authority and there's a lot of pages of like an army of supervillains smashing up a city with very, very few like words or speech balloons. I haven't counted and I haven't got the comic in front of me, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were at least a quarter, if not more, of a lot of issues of The Authority which is just wordless action. And when this was happening at the time, it was very interesting and revolutionary, and within about 5 years it had become a bit of a piss take point, to be honest. A bit of sort of another comic with 5 pages of wordless fighting. I see the writer knocked off early, etc. You know, I see this is another script that consisted of pages 8 to 12, fight. Yeah, obviously I have not seen those scripts. I have no idea whether they maybe wrote a little more choreography into those fights. I'm sure Warren Ellis, who actually started this off and did a good job of it, probably did make some effort to guide the silent fights. Oh yeah, The Authority. It's interesting to revisit. It's obviously it was also a couple of years before 9/11, and there were these superheroes pushing over buildings, which was in some ways a slightly weird aesthetic.
Ah, yes. Well, the sort of thing that, yeah, I don't know. It's very much of its time because it's the sort of thing you probably wouldn't get away with a few years later.
Yeah, anyway, so yeah, that's me revisiting my teenage comics. Alastair, what have you been reading, doing, watching?
So this is my latest lockdown culture dispatch, trying to explaining what's getting me through lockdown and staving off madness slowly as we barely go outside. One thing that I found, has sort of been a bit of a saving grace during this lockdown is the National Theatre's YouTube channel. So I really enjoy the theatre and I like going a lot, and I've had several tickets booked for things that I was really excited for this summer that looks like aren't going to happen, such as Aaron Sorkin's penned stage adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird. That was going to be good. There's a stage version of Philip Pullman's novel The Belle Sauvage. I'm pretty sure those will happen at some point, whenever life gets back to some semblance of normal. But the National Theatre, there's a huge backlog of amazing productions, have been putting one a week up on their YouTube channel to watch a play in its entirety, which has been really good. And they put them up for a week. They go up at 8 o'clock on Thursday, then you've got till 8 o'clock the next Thursday to watch, which is really good because it means that you make time to watch it, because you've only got if there's something you want to see, you've only got a week to see it. I don't know, if they were just up there and they just left up there, you would just let them sit, I find, and there's nothing like a deadline to motivate you to actually sit down and watch something. They've done some great stuff there, which has been really, really good. I really enjoyed watching the Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller adaptation of Frankenstein, directed by Danny Boyle. That's the famous one when, on different nights, they switched which out of Cumberbatch and Miller were playing Frankenstein and the monster. And they put both versions up so you could watch them both and compare. There's also, I've enjoyed Gillian Anderson in A Streetcar Named Desire, she was absolutely excellent. Yeah, considering I haven't actually seen the famous film adaptation, which I probably should watch at some point, that was really, really good to see a version of that. It also made a lot of Simpsons jokes make a lot more sense, because there's quite a few Simpsons references to Streetcar. Yeah, there's some other good stuff. There's Tom Hiddleston in Coriolanus is this week's one. If you listen to this podcast on the day it's released, you'll have until 8 o'clock in the evening to watch on YouTube Tom Hiddleston in Coriolanus. But there, that's been something that's, helped me feel connected to the outside world whilst being in my house almost all the time.
Yeah, I have not been on top of this aggressively, but I did watch the Miller Cumberbatch Frankenstein. I think the one I watched was Johnny Lee Miller as the creature, because in a very presumptuous stereotyping fashion, I just assumed that Cumberbatch would do do better as a sort of haughty genius character who thinks he knows best.
Yeah, that's the version I watched as well, and I thought they were excellent. I mean, that is very much in Cumberbatch's wheelhouse. That was before he'd done Doctor Strange, before he'd played Dominic Cummings in that TV film about Brexit. Yeah, this was definitely part of the arc of Cumberbatch plays insane entitled genius.
I skimmed through the other version, Cumberbatch as the creature, just sort of watched a few key scenes, and it was a strange performance. I don't quite know how to describe it. It seemed a bit too affected. He's still obviously a very, very good actor, and God knows what would happen if I tried to do it. But yeah, I didn't feel like it seemed quite as natural and lived in as Lee Miller's version.
Yeah, Johnny Lee Miller was amazing as the creature. He really brought the sort of pain and isolation of the character, and a lot of those sort of sounds. But the performance is just so physical. Like how it begins with him. It's quite a truncated version of the novel. You need to actually read the novel at some point, but it's one of those things that you learn quite a lot about through cultural osmosis. But yeah, I think they truncate the novel, and it opens with the moment of the creature's creation, and how it just starts with the creature sort of rolling around, unable to stand, walk, talk, brand new to the world, but also in like a sort of full adult's body. And I thought, Johnny Lee Miller was just phenomenal in that, the full physicality of that performance. It was just phenomenal to watch. It's a shame, but yeah, I do highly recommend that, but you can't watch it now because it's been taken down.
I do. I was kind of annoyed I didn't get to watching Anderson as
Blanche Dubois in Streetcar Named Desire.
That I did actually want to see.
Yeah, considering almost all the play takes place in a small flat, they've done an interesting thing of the flat sort of set was sort of made out of these sort of very sparse frames, so you could like peer into like every room. Yeah, I haven't seen the famous Marlon Brando film. For the actor playing Stanley, I was just thinking it must be so hard to do that part without basically doing a Brando impression, like trying to find a way to make the character your own rather than just do a version of what Marlon Brando did. I think in the film they really play up the degree to which Stanley like desires Blanche. In the stage version they kind of went the opposite way, that how much he's sort of like repulsed by her and finds her just sort of superior, and she's always staring down her nose at him and he sort of resents that. So they really played up the kind of the anger of it, which was interesting.
Much like Frankenstein, I'm pretty sure I read Streetcar Named Desire at school, and my memory of it is incredibly vague. And like I can remember in Frankenstein there was a bit more biographical stuff for the Doctor, but I guess in a somewhat relevant modern update fashion they've cut down on the extent to which they talk about the Doctor and his interesting biography and focused on the suffering of his victim.
But yeah, it was very good, and I'm excited over the weekend to watch Tom Hiddleston in Coriolanus. I also saw This House, which is a play set in the Whip's office in Parliament during the 1970s, which was very good. So yeah, they've been putting excellent stuff up there. So, and there's all sorts of documentaries as well. They put on the YouTube channel like short documentaries behind the scenes, how they did things. So if you're interested in the theatre at all, or just looking for something to watch because you've watched everything you can think of on Netflix now that you're inside all the time, I do recommend going over to the National Theatre YouTube channel and watching some interesting plays.
Cool. I should actually try and get into the habit of at least seeing what's up and if I want to watch it, rather than always finding out about it about 10 seconds before they delete them. Alright, first big review this week. We are talking about Space Force from Netflix. This is a new sitcom based on the topical revelation that President Donald Trump, a very serious and competent man, wants to start a new branch of the US military to put boots on the moon. I assume that's an actual quote. They keep saying it in the show, but I don't actually know if Trump actually said the words boots on the moon. But anyway, the sitcom version of Space Force features Steve Carell as General Ned, the career general who has been moved over from his previous serious military work to this slightly spurious vanity project, and he's assisted by Professor Mallory, the lead scientist of the organisation, played by John Malkovich, and most prominently to me at least, Ben Schwartz as Tony, his social media man, who is an actor who I have a lot of affection for previous roles, most notably John Ralphio from Parks and Rec. But anyway, there was 10 episodes of this up on Netflix. I have seen them all, not sure how many Alastair has seen, but this is fun workplace sitcom antics in which a military man tries to understand space. Alastair, what did you think?
So I've seen 8 out of the 10.
Not bad.
Not bad, and which I think is enough to get a flavour of the whole thing. Yeah, so it was interesting view experience. The first episode I thought wasn't super funny. I guess it might be just been the curse of first episodes. There's a lot of characters and situations to introduce, and whilst you're busy introducing all the characters, there's a reasonable number of characters in this show that's for sort of a 30-minute sitcom. There wasn't enough time for like a lot of really, really good laughs, which sort of maybe gave me a kind of lowered expectations through the whole thing. And I saw a few slightly negative comments on Twitter from people who'd seen it. Then I left it a few days before I came back to it. And I don't know, something about this lowered expectations meant that I really enjoyed it as it went on, that I kind of felt it improved from the first episode. When it got into the show, there was, quite a lot of really funny bits and some really good comic set pieces, which there wasn't really in the first episode. What sort of struck me most about the show is that it's a fairly straight up traditional buddy sort of workplace sitcom. You've got two mismatched main characters, the Steve Carell character and the John Malkovich character. They have to work together. Their personalities are very different. They fall out, but they always muddle through in the end. They're not trying to be sort of clever or postmodern in the way they format the show or set it up. Even though it's got some clever jokes, it's funny jokes, and it's very contemporary. Donald Trump's space program. It's got social media jokes. It's very contemporary, but it's not trying to do anything like super modern. I get the feeling this is a sort of sitcom they could have made in the 90s. But it's interesting to see a more traditional sitcom following on the heels of something like, I don't know, Parks and Rec or The Office, or even like Master of None, which I felt was trying to do something a bit more like comment on the sitcom as well as doing it as a sitcom. This is very much a straight up TV sitcom.
I mean, I found it hard to avoid The Office, Parks and Rec comparisons, as well as the presence of Steve Carell and the guy who played John Ralphio from Parks and Rec. It's also written by the original lead writer of the US Office. And yeah, it's a weird show to talk about, because on one level, once I got past the pilot, the first episode, which as you said is a bit slow and clunky and has to manage a lot of setup, I did find it was a pretty enjoyable, watchable way to spend half an hour for the most part. Everyone's quite likeable. It sort of cruises along. There's this sort of reliable drip feed of laughs. They've got a good balance of getting some jokes in, but also having a solid attempt to give the characters some sort of little journey or a little lesson or a little emotion. I did find myself quite invested, slightly to my surprise, in the characters of General Ned and Professor Mallory and their relationship and so on. By the end of the series, there were a few quite nice, quite sweet moments towards the end, which land, to be honest, surprisingly well, considering I was feeling a bit, about them in the first couple of episodes. So yeah, it's a nice show. It's a fun sort of silly sitcom to watch. At the same time, though, I now have to make a lot of comments that will lead mostly as complaints. In that, although I found it perfectly watchable, I think a lot of that is the cast. I think Steve Carell and John Malkovich especially are very good, although the rest of the cast get more to do as the show goes on. Like, there's people who play background characters, like the main pilot who gets anything to do, Captain Ali, and the main doctor, the main scientist from Malkovich's team, Dr. Chan, do get more subplots as the series goes on and a bit more to do. There's a teenage daughter character for the main Steve Carell general, who, like a lot of teenage daughter characters, has her moments but kind of feels a bit like she's there because she's the sort of character you have in this show, but they're not quite sure what to do with her. On the other hand, his wife, played by Lisa Kudrow, is great. Obviously, Lisa Kudrow, she gets to play a slightly weird, unpredictable, off-the-wall character, not as obnoxiously so as Phoebe from Friends, but still, and does clearly enjoy it. So yeah, the cast do a lot to make the material work and seem sort of resonant. It's chosen to put this sort of glossy comedy drama sheen over it rather than go full silly, and within that scope it does quite a good job. But the part that sounds like a criticism is that, to be honest, the main criticism I have of this show, which sounds a lot harsher than I mean it could probably have used more and better jokes. Like, it's a very gentle comedy. I mean, maybe it's benefiting from the pandemic and the fact that I'm okay spending half an hour with likeable characters, but there were very few what I would describe as uproarious lols. I did not PMSL. So yeah, I don't know. I came away thinking, that was gently amusing and I like these characters. Really wish I'd LMFAO or whatever it is.
You're right that it didn't have many like super funny big comic set pieces. I was trying to remember what the last sitcom we reviewed was, and I seem to remember that my main comment on that was that there's quite a lot of funny lines and sort of witty bits of dialogue. There aren't enough big comic set pieces. Like, in a great sort of sitcom, or comedy thing, you would find that like an episode would build throughout the arc of the episode to a conclusion where, it would be really, really funny, a big kind of sort of things fall apart moment when lots of funny things are happening that the whole episode has been building towards. I mean, usually the best example for this is like an episode of Fawlty Towers, where it would just build to the moment where like Basil just completely loses at the end. Everything goes to pieces. It's just incredibly funny. This show, similar to the last sitcom we reviewed, it's a similar criticism. There's a lot of very witty one-liners, also clever observations, sort of witty sparring between characters. But each episode has a sort of dramatic plot arc. I felt it really built to like a conclusion that had like a really, really funny bit at the end when all the sort of episode would come together into like a really, really funny sort of set piece. There were a couple, I felt, and I guess we're going to start dropping some spoilers at this point. There's an episode when they have to find a spy, and Dr. Mallory's sent an encrypted communication, and then Steve Carell gets it decrypted in front of all of Dr. Mallory's stuff, and obviously it's just this moment of like total humiliation. That is kind of a quite funny set piece. There's another one when they fix a satellite in space that's been damaged, and the only available asset on hand is a chimpstronaut, I think they say, a chimpanzee they sent into space. And obviously after convincing the chimpanzee to try and fix the satellite, it kind of goes wrong and ends up with the chimp sort of being thrown off into space. So those are a couple of like really funny set pieces, but there aren't that many of them for the 8 episodes I saw. So that's 2, the only 2 I can really think of out of 8 episodes. And I felt that like a lot of, episodes, they would build to a conclusion, but it wouldn't just be like, this kind of big comedic moment where you felt that all the humour was paying off.
A lot of the time it builds to more of a sort of character moment, really. Like, one of the things that was good about the bit with Dr. Mallory's encrypted message that you mentioned is that it served as both a big comedic payoff, and it actually has quite a nice, understated character moment between the 2 main characters that spins out of it afterwards. So they could sort of get to do both. And that's probably one of the best bits of the series, actually.
Yeah, exactly. It was funny and also informed on the characters. I do like how each episode usually ends with like a kind of nice, really sweet moment on the end.
It's all very Scrubs, isn't it?
Yeah, or I think it was The Simpsons that does it the best. King of the Hill as well. I always find it's a mistake with a sitcom. A lot of writers are, okay, last second of the show, hit in one more joke to end on a funny. It's a sitcom, end with the joke. Weirdly, that sometimes can feel tonally a bit off. Like the great episodes of The Simpsons, they end with a sweet moment that leaves you this kind of warm, pleasant feeling at the end. King of the Hill does it well. The crucial thing about both those shows, especially The Simpsons, is there's a really high density, especially in classic Simpsons, of great jokes throughout. They don't need that extra joke on the end because it's been so funny for 20 minutes. They can hit that warm note on the end, and they don't need an extra joke. This show obviously is not as funny as classic Simpsons, but it is nice to have that warm moment on the end, but you kind of think you have to earn it by being funnier beforehand.
Well, yeah, I mean, it also draws the inevitable, which I'm trying not to do too much, comparisons with The Office and Parks and Rec, both of which are also very good at hammering the jokes for 19 minutes, then having a 1-minute sort of touching scene at the end.
It's good when it works.
My point is those two are also both funnier.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also weird. I don't honestly know if this is a criticism or not. I've seen it used quite hard as a criticism in some of the other reviews. It's weird that this show has clearly emerged from a conversation where someone in a meeting has said to someone else in a meeting, maybe just in a casual conversation, who knows. I know everything in life is a meeting now, but when they were first planning this show, it probably wasn't. Someone has said to someone, lol, Trump wants to do a Space Force, that's so silly, we should make a sitcom about it. And that seems to be where this show is coming from conceptually. That's kind of how it was advertised. Where is the satire?
Yeah, this show weirdly is not a satire at all.
And it takes the whole concept of the Space Force weirdly seriously, considering it's a show that's clearly a that of how stupid it is.
Yeah.
I barely even understand how this has happened.
It's a workplace sitcom, I suppose, like The Office and Parks and Rec, are not a political satire, which is what you'd expect.
But even Parks and Rec had there was always some concepts of, like, Dunder Mifflin is a paper company and paper is a sort of a sad dying industry, or the city of Pawnee, where Parks and Rec was based, was always portrayed as the most disgusting, sad place full of incredibly stupid people. I don't think this show even goes really for that. There's no sense that this workplace is silly or pointless. It's actually played as a surprisingly straight enterprise. It's basically given a lot of the same lofty gravitas as almost any other TV show about astronauts. There's this vague concept, but they really are seriously reaching for the dream of space, and it's vaguely admirable, even if it has come out of this ridiculous edict, which is not how I thought they'd play it.
Yeah, it is strange how little satire there is in this show. On some level, I kind of understand that, Trump is beyond satire at this point. He is kind of his own satire. It is weird, the amount of, I don't know, sometimes you go to stand-up comedy and you always think it's a bit lazy when a comedian comes out and goes, hey, Trump, he's a bit stupid, isn't he? I can't believe Trump's the president. How stupid is that? Man, America, what's gone wrong? Donald Trump is the president. I was like, yeah. Reality makes those jokes. It's kind of lazy comedy writing. Yeah, I heard an interview with a comedian I know we both love, Andy Zaltzman. Someone asked him, how do you satire Trump? And he's like, it's basically impossible. The only way he did it was by editing Donald Trump's speeches together to turn him into a fan of 1920s English cricket. Andy Zaltzman said the main reason why he did that is so he could be certain that no one had made that Trump joke before. So I could kind of understand that, like, yeah, kind of, oh, Trump's an idiot and a sort of narcissist and a sort of authoritarian with these mad ideas. I can see why that, a good comedy writer looked to that and go, it's obvious, it'll date badly, it's kind of lazy writing. And so they thought, like, well, we'll just have this sort of slightly unhinged president or very unhinged president as a sort of backdrop, and it's kind of the reason why this is happening is mentioned sometimes. He never appears unless he appears in the last 2 episodes, which I doubt, and we'll just focus on the characters and the situation they're in. I can see the process and thought that led up to that, but does it malign the original concept?
I don't know. Maybe it's possible that this was just beyond satire to begin with, but I don't know. I just expected a lot to go a bit harder on how silly it fundamentally is. Would it be a little unrealistic for, like, complete idiots and comedy characters to make it into, like, this level? Maybe, but, it's a sitcom. Do it anyway, guys. Kind of plays into what I was saying about more and better jokes, I suppose. The characters were there, the sort of nice emotional moments at the end were there. I just felt like they really could have gone a bit harder on the general, this is silly, let's do some silliness. But that might just be my taste in comedy.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought for a second it was like a fear of mocking the military, but the one, like, satirical jab they do get in a few times is having stupid general characters who just want to bomb things. So, maybe not.
Yeah, the general nerd character he's a sort of a satire of a sort of pompous, self-important military type. Yeah, there are quite a lot of military-esque jokes and how, like, inflexible he is and things like that. And then obviously there's some jokes about how the Dr. Mary character and the other scientists are, they're not really down with this whole let's blow things up sort of thing and want to foster a spirit of cooperation. It's sort of satire, but it's also, at the same time, it's quite broad sort of writing in that, like, the military people are stuck up, the science people are more interested in science than blowing things up. Which, leads to one of my criticisms, which is, although I thought that, there's a lot of good characters and there's some quite funny ones, I do think there's sort of quite a lot of obvious characters. In that, the general's pompous and stuck up. The scientist isn't so keen on the blowing things up. The Ben Schwartz character, the social media one that you mentioned before, I felt it was a little bit obvious, like, the guy who's in charge of social media is obnoxious, vain, and more obsessed with, like, likes and clicks than reality or his own integrity. The teenage daughter is sassy but also cynical and annoyed with her father. There's a few other characters like that. There's a bonehead soldier. There are some obvious comedy characters.
It's a very straight workplace sitcom, as you say. They're not challenging much here.
Yeah, I didn't think they didn't do, like, oh, how do we take this character and, like, do a different twist on them? Like, what's an unusual twist on the kind of rebellious teenage daughter or cynical teenage daughter? What's an unusual twist on, well, basically the annoying advertising colleague, which is obviously now this annoying social media guy. The only thing that is was a surprising twist was putting his wife in prison, which is just like catches you totally off guard when they reveal. Because in the first episode, it jumps forwards like a year that she's in prison. Also, do something different because they can either write his wife as a sort of stereotypical military wife or write her as the kind of the exact opposite of the Steve Carell character, but they haven't gone in either of those directions, which would be obvious. They've just decided, right, we'll put her in prison and get humour from that, which was one of the few, like, times when they actually did something that struck me as original and different.
That was one of the big sort of moments of the show, which again I felt it could have used more of. Again, it's frustrating because I'm being sort of gently critical. It's hard not to get out of a vibe of it could have been more, they could have done more, but as I say, quite enjoyed watching it.
Yeah.
But although for the record, I'm going to be brief and vague here because Alastair hasn't seen them. But the last couple of episodes, especially the last one, are not the best. The finale is a bit weak and features some rushed and woolly writing, which is a shame. It's Netflix, for God's sake. Just give yourself more minutes or episodes. Don't just cram everything in. Anyway, I'm not going to go into it at length, just in case Alastair actually has plans to watch the final couple.
I definitely will see the end. I enjoyed it enough to watch the last two. I'll probably have watched it by the time this drops, so do let us know what you think on Twitter or what have you about the show. The other thing that I saw pointed out, really is that, like, a few people pointed out, is that this show looks really expensive, which is one of the things that, considering it's not hugely funny, I wonder if they will get a second series, because they've got a lot of high-profile people in it, and they clearly just lavish money at it. There's lots of special effects bits of rockets taking off, which can't have been cheap. Plus, like, it's shot on several very large sets with lots of background characters. There's lots of things involving helicopters and stuff, and they clearly haven't spared the expense on this. So I don't know if that means it might not get a second series, or we might find it's got a much cheaper second series that takes place mainly in Nerd's office rather than over, like, about 8 different sets as they do have right now.
I felt like the sort of filmic sheen they've put over it I don't know. Part of me always feels like they'd be better off making it look a bit more sitcom-y, and that might open it up to be a bit sillier. Like maybe it feels like they've got to be a bit more, I don't know, epic and serious, where they're in this sort of cinematic vein.
There's one thing that's different to like a 90s sitcom is that the amount of on-location shooting and the kind of huge range of sets. But, I mean, overall, yeah, I thought it was funny. I would be really interested to see what other people thought of this, because my general takeaway was could be funnier, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, my general takeaway was, I enjoyed that. There's room for improvements. I mean, both The Office and Parks and Rec, to mention them yet again, had like okay to slightly clunky first seasons and then massively soared in the second season. So, you never know. Maybe the second season of Space Force will be amazing. Okay, and next up we're going to talk about Family Tree, a new post-apocalyptic horror comic from Image, and this is a story about a family who, well, the post-apocalyptic element seems to be in the future still. This is set in the 90s and is about a family who go on the run for a mysterious cult when they discover that their daughter appears to be, for lack of a better term, turning into a tree, and are then met by the daughter's long-lost grandfather, who reveals that this may well be a bit of a family curse, and things sort of open up from there. So yeah, the title is very much an enjoyable load-bearing pun. But yeah, so this is a new series from Image. We have reviewed the first 4 issues, which make up the first collected edition, which is out now. Alastair, what did you think of it?
I thought it was good. The main selling point for me was the family drama, the sort of dynamics between the characters. I thought was very good. That it sort of begins with a single mum. She's picking up her daughter, and then she's got to go and get her son, who's in trouble at school. It's the fairly sort of straight family setup, and then quite quickly get into the daughters turning into a tree. And then when this long lost grandfather appears, which is her absent husband's, if we assume the main character is the wife or mother, it's her absent husband's father who turns up. And then what I find good about this is the kind of the dynamics between them. There's always a bit of character drama going on. There's clearly a conflict between the mother and her father-in-law. She doesn't know exactly what happened to her husband when he disappeared, and there's no love lost between her and her father-in-law. So with all that going on, there's always in the background, even when the plot's moving forwards, even when there's sort of action and sort of bits of horror and things like that, or body horror, there's always like that's sort of simmering underneath the tensions between the characters and their relationships, which I really liked.
Yeah, I've read a lot of Jeff Lemire in the last few years. He's very much a writer who I read a few bits of work of 2 or 3 years ago now, I think. Immediately decided he was a new writer who I really, really liked, and then proceeded to consume probably not quite his entire back catalogue, but a pretty sizable chunk of it. And yeah, he does families very, very well. He's written a lot of stories which centre around families or family dynamics or relationships between parents and children. And it's something he's clearly very interested in. And yeah, he's very, very good at it. He could write these sort of exchanges between family members that contain a lot of history. There's a lot of sincere family dialogue without it being cheesy or without having to use sort of forced banter. It's probably one of these things that looks easy but is actually hard, writing convincing families, but it's one of these things that Jeff Lemire is very good at. And yeah, that sort of relationship does a good job of underpinning it, because it gets into the sort of sci-fi stuff, well, fantasy, I guess. There's not really much attempt to sell the real science of this kid turning into a tree. It gets into the fantasy stuff quite quickly, but yeah, because he's able to establish the family in pretty broad strokes, so the characterization still lands, and the granddad turns up I think at some point after the first issue, and it's fairly obvious the sort of relationship between them. So yeah, it's a very good, enjoyable, sort of readable comic. It's got a very, again, this sort of cinematic quality of the story unfolds in a very sort of natural, easy to follow way.
Yeah, you're right that he writes families really well. I think he writes children really well, especially. We reviewed in this podcast, I think we discussed it more than once, Descender,
yeah,
a comic that Jeff Lemire wrote that focuses around a sort of companion robot child. The idea being he's set in the future as like a companion child to either, I guess, a family without children or who have a child who wants a sibling. And I think, yeah, that character is really well written, and the two children in this family are really well written, as a child and a teenager, I suppose you might say. And I think they're always, it must be hard to write children, because I think people fall into the trap of writing them as basically as stupid. Like, children don't know as much as adults, but I think he writes them as clearly like intelligent, sort of intelligence without wisdom. The thing, they don't have experience, but that doesn't make them dumb. And also he does get across how scary it is. It is quite a tense, fast-paced, quite scary comic in that the sense of like they don't know what's happening, the stress, they're really worried. You do feel for the poor kid who's turning into a tree. It would be a horrifying experience. And that kind of tension sort of bubbles throughout, which is good. Without it, kind of you don't get kind of tension fatigue, but also it's constantly there in the background as a constant presence. There's like some, although you don't find out much about them in the first 4 issues, there's these cultists, possibly slightly mad, definitely very violent people who are hunting after the daughter. And there's also a lot of tension comes from that. Yeah, again, it's all just good writing, really.
Yeah, I mean, I liked that there's not, although it doesn't go hugely into the details of what's happening with the fantasy stuff in these first 4 issues, it's very, you get enough of a taste of it to get the feeling there's something there you're just sort of on the surface of, which we'll presumably dive a lot deeper into in later issues.
Yeah, exactly. Which is good that it doesn't overburden early issues with lots of exposition, but I did feel that, especially by issue 4, there was enough for me to have a sort of vague understanding of what was going on and sort of where it was going, which is what I needed. That I did felt some brief explanation in the first 4 issues. Not too early on, because you want to preserve the mystery and you want to get down to telling a good story, but you do need to give the reader something. I know, by the first major chunk of story.
Yeah, at the beginning there's a flash forward to this sort of post-apocalyptic future. Well, I guess it might actually be the post-apocalyptic present. It's quite hard to tell for now. But yeah, it's a clear sign that he's, I guess, going somewhere with this. At some point this is going to segue into the future, or, I don't know, God knows, maybe at the end of issue 6 they'll discover time travel. Stranger things have actually happened in Jeff Lemire comics.
Yeah. It took me a while to realise it was set in the 90s, because there are a few flashbacks within the story itself. I thought they were flashing back to the 90s from the present, but then it turns out, no, the story is set in the 90s with sort of hints that our present is post-apocalyptic. They're telling the story of how the world collapsed in the 90s into the present day. Yeah, which took me a while to get my head around, but I don't know, it worked. It means it's like you don't have to worry about things involving cell phones issues, I suppose, if you set something in the past.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. I guess if he starts in the past, there were no cell phones, and if in the present day society has collapsed, there were also no cell phones, thus he's avoided them entirely.
Yeah. Because it can be difficult, sometimes like modern thriller writers, it's like, why don't they just use a phone call to get out of it? Oh, strategically timed, my phone has lost power, or I have no signal. But anyway, that's what he's avoided falling into.
Yeah, I got to issue 4 and then it ended, and I don't feel the need to spoil exactly how it ends, but I got to issue 4 where it ended, and I was a bit sort of, felt like it was really getting cooking in the last issue or 2, and now it's over.
Yeah,
Damn it.
But I suppose there's more coming out, I suppose.
Oh yeah, but issue 5 is already out, I think, and then obviously the whole industry went on pause due to the virus. But I hope it has not scuppered Family Tree entirely. I don't actually have the schedule in front of me, but I would hope that now that comics are slowly but surely beginning to come out again, we'll see more Family Tree soon.
Yeah, it was really quick to read and kind of really enjoyable. I read it over 4 days, just like 1 issue a day, which was actually quite nice to have my daily dive into Family Tree. I sort of got a bit of routine in that as soon as I finished work for the day, but I just, turn off my work emails before I did anything else, pick up my iPad, read an issue, which was quite a nice routine to get into. And it's quite good to read over a short period of time, but kind of in that sort of episodic format, because like each issue does like kind of have a cliffhanger ending and is a sort of self-contained modular story in itself. So reading it in a sort of in daily installments, I felt worked really well. And it was interesting. It was quite quick to read, considering the last comic I read was Doom Patrol, which I did enjoy very much, but it took me much longer to read each issue of Doom Patrol. I don't know if they were longer or if maybe there's just more. Going back to what you were saying about the authority at the beginning of the podcast, it did get me thinking that, is it because there's more writing in an issue of Doom Patrol, whereas Family Tree is like you say, a bit more modern, a post-authority, more sparsely written, more long action scenes, whereas Doom Patrol, being before that, it's got more dialogue and more writing, so it takes longer to read.
Yeah, but I think Grant Morrison is a wordier writer than Jeff Lemire, so there are definitely more words. And yeah, comics were just in general a bit more packed in with panels in the old days, and possibly also a few pages longer, to be honest. I think Lemire, I've always found Lemire's comics quite quick reads. Like, it's one reason why I suggested we read this once it reached a collected edition, because I think if we just covered issue 1, I mean, it's a well-written issue, but I don't know if I'd have had a huge amount to say about it.
Yeah.
Family Tree is definitely I don't know if it would describe itself as post-authority, but it's definitely from the era of comics where they're written as chapters in an ongoing story.
Yeah, there wasn't huge amounts of dialogue, which is why it's kind of really good how he gets across all the characters and family dynamics so accessibly.
Yeah, a lot of that is obviously so that Phil Hester can draw large expanses of plant life, which he's very good at.
Yeah, which was excellent.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's very much what you look for when you want an artist for this comic. But yeah, Phil Hester's clearly very good at drawing these huge spreads full of like verdant greenery.
Yeah, and I thought the art was phenomenal. It was really beautiful to look at. It was moody and dark and kind of really, again, added to that kind of simmering tension throughout the whole thing. And also the body horror aspects really well done. Like, because the comic style I felt was maybe slightly abstract in terms of the way the art was, in that it was clearly, you weren't looking at something that was supposed to be like a photoreal representation of what these characters look like or what it would look like to have like a tree growing out of you. But the fact that it's still slightly abstract meant it looked very believable. It looked like you could believe that was an actual tree growing out of a person because of the degree you're looking at it. But also that made the body horror feel much more real and much more present, because when you could believe that's a tree growing out of someone, it really made you feel like, oh, it's so unpleasant just to wake up and just discover. I mean, it sounds silly when you say it, to wake up, discover there was like a tree growing out of you, but it would make you think, it would be terrifying. You would think, like, am I going to die? What's going to happen to me? Is this going to be painful? Probably. So yeah, the fact it gets that across really sort of nails the body horror elements of it.
Well, yeah, it's a side-by-side thing with the more down-to-earth stuff. Like, there's in the first issue especially, there's a lot of around the family dinner table stuff, and then there's a bit where they talk to one of the kids' head teacher at the school and stuff, but it's all very standard down-to-earth day-to-day stuff, and it pulls that off very relatably and then manages to quite neatly bring the body horror into it. So in a way that neither of them feel massively out of place, but the horror stuff still stands out. It's nicely done. Yeah,
the whole thing sort of based around, and there's obviously this mystery element to it, like the question of what is happening, that there's some explanation of, but what I felt is really, like, what entices you to read on is you do want to find out what's happening, like why is this happening and where is it going, which obviously is good for an opening salvo of a story.
Well, yeah, and again, the characters are, I mean, I think I've said before, I've gotten into the habit of trying not to just populate stories I write on the occasions that I write them with, just every person characters, because I feel it's sometimes a bit bland. But, Jeff Lemire here has very much just started off with a few every people and successfully made them relatable, interesting and good within a few pages, because he's a very good writer.
Yeah.
I have just checked, and they are, I think, picking up on Family Tree in mid-June, and then they seem to be back on a roughly monthly schedule, sort of mid-July, mid-August. So, yeah, hopefully it'll be continuing, and the second collection will be on us before too long.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, glad it's still going, and glad the issues are coming out, because it would be interesting to see where it goes as a story. And the characters really are the strength of it, and they're both written and drawn very well to really make you relate to them, especially for a story that is kind of mainly about a mystery. I would say that, like, although the mystery is interesting, what's most engaging about it is the characters, which is good, because I guess a less competent writer would lean more on the mystery and do the characterization more slowly. But this has convinced you these characters are real people, and then gives you a mystery afterwards.
Well, yeah, I think it's well paced to just give us like a taste of the mystery and not focus on that, because to have the confidence to assume that he'll get future issues to expand on the mystery. But if we don't care about the characters, we probably just won't come back. So yeah, another good comic from Jeff Lemire. Just keeps churning them out.
That's all we have time for in this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence. If you have enjoyed this podcast, then please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find other episodes of this podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want even more, you can find us on social media. We are Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook or MFV Podcast on Twitter. And yep, I've been Nick Bryant. You can find me online at NickMB on Twitter, where you can also gaze in fear and respect at my new cartoon Twitter avatar drawn by the excellent artist John Tucker. Or you can go to my website, nickbryan.com, and read more of my work.
I've been Alastair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlastairJRBall, and can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Thanks for listening. In our next episode, we will be reviewing the second series of vampire sitcom What We Do in the Shadows, and the TV adaptation of Bong Joon-ho's film Snowpiercer. See you then. Goodbye.
Bye. Time.
Space Force time. Spaceman, I always wanted you to go.
Cool, I'll try and remember to leave that in.
Oh dear.
This fortnight's shitty musical interlude.